professionalized way of doing this, not only based on enthusiasm and personal engagement and wanting to do things right, but really to make things right. We need to change that landscape. We want to change that landscape, and we are on a good way to do it already. But it requires tools that make that interaction more efficient, more fruitful, manage expectations, but also improve contribution options in a systematic way. So we want to make sure that we all do things in a way that we think is right. And we do not want to have to think about that all the time from scratch, but we need to have an agreed basic understanding of how things should be done. And this is what we have and are still doing in Paradigm, trying to create that infrastructure governance, or this infrastructure governance structure, to make sure that we can focus on the content of the collaboration and not on the frame of the collaboration anymore. To be able to do that, we have developed different tools, and I am part of work package 4 in this IMI Paradigm project, of that task force that is responsible for creating the ultimate content of the tools. And we will present these tools now piece by piece in the next couple of forum events. So today we will present 3. On the 9th of July, we will present 3 others. And then again, we will present results in September. So you will step by step learn about these tools that we have developed, these guidances, these checklists, these all type of various possibilities to make your life easier when engaging as a patient with pharma companies, ethics committees, competent authorities, HTA bodies, or on the other side, when all these different stakeholders want to engage with patients in the most efficient and fruitful way. Next slide, please. As you have heard, this is occurring through Paradigm. That's what we are representing here. But of course, UPATI and PFMD are also working on these tools and or have already worked on some of these tools. Therefore, we are contributing here to this in a joint interest, and therefore are also organizing this PEOF in a collaborative way. We have sometimes a bit of difficulties to figure out who represents whom, because we are working in, the same people are working in different activities here. So I'm working in Paradigm, but as a representative of EFGCP, who is an active partner also in UPATI. Next slide, please. So we would like really that you help us to spread the word on what we are doing here, how we are doing it, that you raise awareness, that you help us to have discussions, to come to a framework that is mutually acceptable, broadly acceptable by our community, and that can be accepted as the frame for our collaboration, hopefully on a global basis. So what we are going to do today in this workshop here is we want to present 3 different documents that we have prepared. On one hand, recommendations on how to identify the right match for the right patient engagement activity. Matchmaking has been a very important topic all through, also already at the design of the Paradigm project, and the need for matchmaking is there, but that starts already with a definition of how to handle matchmaking. And this recommendation here is has been worked out in much detail, but tries now to be comprehensive and clear in how to approach that in principle. A very important element of matchmaking, of finding together, is transparency. and therefore the handling of conflicts of interest, and as we have agreed in Paradigm, really by trying to avoid this by having a principal approach to declaration of interest, so that we have a possibility to potentially and hopefully avoid any type of conflicts of interest. Also, there is a recommendation on how to handle that. There are also tools that you can use in your daily work. And what we want to do here is present the content of these recommendations to you, but apply them directly to a case study, so that you can see in how far this is really relevant for also your work, your activities, and how you can apply that. The second or the third document that we are presenting here is a document and guidance that has created quite a bit of discussion, because it is new in the sense of that we have not spoken so often about the need to have something on reporting of patient engagement activities. But there was a gap analysis of very large gap analysis work performed by Work Package 2 in this Paradigm project that came up with a number of very, very relevant gaps that are there outside, because of course it was a quite actual review of what is out there, and a couple of gaps have been identified that will be published soon. But one that was really a big, quite prominent one was that, yes, there are patient engagement activities, but we don't know what happened. We don't know whether they were successful. We don't know what are the lessons that we can learn from that. And therefore, we decided in Paradigm to create recommendations on preparing and disseminating a report or reporting from patient engagement activities. There is no legal obligation for that. We will have in Europe the clinical trial regulation that makes it a requirement to report all clinical trial results to the authorities and ethics committees, but also in a lay summary to patients and the public at large. But a report on patient engagement activities is not required. But we consider this a very important element of best practices, and therefore we would like to present our proposal here on how to approach that to make it ultimately an absolutely consistent element of the work that we are doing when we are doing patient engagement activities. Next slide, please. So, as you have, when you are familiar with Paradigm, you know these next slides probably by heart. But the consortium has a mission that means participates to the co-creation of a sustainable framework allowing systematic, meaningful, and ethical patient engagement in medicines R&D. And we had, in the preparation of the proposal for this project, to limit ourselves, of course, to some doable things in that short period of time that we have for this project. So we agreed on having 3 exemplary time points in the medicine's life cycle. That is, on one hand, research and priority setting, secondly, design of clinical trials, and thirdly, early dialogue with regulators and HTA bodies. And so our objectives was really to develop processes and tools for these 3 points in the medicine's life cycle activities, and also to develop a sustainable roadmap for patient engagement based on this professionalization of our way, how we are doing our work in future. But of course, the guidance that we are giving, the recommendations that we have worked out, are meant to go beyond those 3 points in the medicine's development process, and to have validity and relevance for all activities within the life cycle. Next slide, please. The members of our consortium are very, broad. We, as you know, IMI is based on the collaboration between the pharmaceutical industry and academia, but patient organizations and not-for-profit organizations play in many of them also a very important role, and especially IMI has made very strong efforts to make patient engagement also within the IMI organization a really a living element, an important living element. And there are also already in the UPATI project was an IMI project that was patient-led. And also here, this one here, Paradigm, is patient-led. So we live patient engagement on a daily basis. Next slide, please. The way we worked was that on one hand, we defined the stakeholders, identified preferences, needs, and expectations. There was a large collection of information at the beginning in a very structured and comprehensive process. And all that information was then assessed. Gaps were identified, as I mentioned already, and in a very, also very comprehensive way and with many discussions. And we also had in the last open forum then further discussions on gaps that have been identified and how to address these gaps and how to prioritize those gaps. And because we have limited resources, that's very clear. One important aspect was not only documents for recommendations, etc., but also to develop metrics for monitoring and evaluation, because we need to also prove that patient engagement is really a win-win situation for all participants. So ultimately, out of this, the information collection and filtering and assessment, can you go one back, please? I was not yet completely finished. No, one further. Yeah, this one, thank you. We ultimately came then to the conclusion on which type of topics we need to address in which way, which was not an easy decision, and led to the fact that we have then co-designed the recommendations and resources for patient engagement. Not too many to not make it too difficult, but still enough to make it valuable and helpful. And that was then the basis also for our sustainability strategy, for our dissemination and engagement strategy, and altogether, of course, we have a project coordination and management infrastructure in our project that helps us to get all this done within time and within budget of this project. Next slide, please. So we have the tools with the following objectives. Sorry. On one hand, we want to increase stakeholders' preparedness for patient engagement in the priority areas in the medicine's life cycle that are addressed by Paradigm, but of course by also making them valid for areas beyond those 3 time points. And we want to develop also recommendations on the required capabilities for each stakeholder to be better prepared for meaningful and effective patient engagement. Because if we are not properly prepared, all stakeholders properly prepared and are aware of what we need to do, it will not work. We want to develop guidance, and we have done this, on patient engagement, addressing each key stakeholder group's requirements. You know, and so there was already quite a bit of discussion, which stakeholders do we really have and which ones do we therefore also need to address. Ultimately, we need to enhance the stakeholders' capacity to concretely implement efficient patient engagement policies through the development of a capacity building toolbox that we created, targeting all stakeholders. Because if there is not enough capacity of professional people, of people who know how to do it, it will not work. This is a snowball effect. The more people we have who are professional in that area, the more we have a chance to make this a basic, normal element of our professional environment. And ultimately, we need and want to support the communication in uptake and dissemination of the project's emerging results, with the aim of promoting adoption of the results by all stakeholders. And that will be a very, very important next step, that after we have prepared these documents, after we have now ask for commenting and further ideas in the public consultation that has started beginning of June and that is still running at the moment, and where I would really want you to ensure that you go to the Paradigm website and that you participate in the public consultation on the different documents, and that you disseminate the information about this possibility. At this stage, unfortunately, because of the short period of the project, we cannot give you a lot of time. So please look as quickly as possible on the Paradigm website and go into these different documents and give us your comments. But then we also, once we have finalized them, we really need to make sure that they are very, very broadly seen, understood, recognized, and taken into people's daily life. Next slide. So here are the documents or the topics that we have dealt with. So on one hand, I mentioned already the recommendations on how to find the right match for the right patient engagement activity. That is what we are going to discuss today. And also the next one, raising awareness on managing competing interests in a multi-stakeholder environment. There is then also the enhancement of the UPATI industry guidance that you have, hopefully and probably aware that UPATI has created 4 guidances for patient engagement with pharmaceutical industry, competent authorities, HTA bodies, and ethics committees. They are all published in Frontiers, but the decision was made that especially the industry guidance has to be further amended with practical tools, and that is what you will see then in that part. Then we have guidance for reporting and dissemination of patient engagement activities, which we will hear about today. Then we have recommendations on required capabilities for patient engagement. We have a monitoring and evaluation framework, a community advisory board guidance document and templates, because that's also a very important element of patient engagement. We have patient engagement agreements from WeCan explained in more, let's say, lay language terms, but by just giving explanations to different terms in these documents on which people can click on and then get explanations for these terms. We will have, and that is still in the making, recommendations for HTA bodies to conduct patient engagement activity during early dialogue. And we have produced a code of conduct, which is now also in the public consultation, which is practically extracting the key elements from all these other documents and is trying to pull them together in a much shorter than all the other documents way, but with a certain level of explanations, because it is a standalone document. Next slide, please. And then with this, I would like to hand over to the first presentation of the case study for these 2 documents, and that will be presented by Mathieu Boud, by Kay Warner, by Elisa Ferrer, and Maria Caveller. So I hand over to you, and I guess you put me on mute now.
Thank you, Ingrid, for that very kind introduction and very good overview of Paradigm. It's very helpful to see that from a Paradigm member perspective, just to remind ourselves of how far we've come and the great work that we've done so far. So I'm Kay Warner from GSK in a very hot UK. I feel like I'm melting in my home office today. I have the honour of presenting the case study slides to you today. And we're going to be focusing on the 2 aspects that Ingrid mentioned earlier. So just a couple of messages before we start. And the first one I've been asked to say to everyone is that, can you please use the chat function to send your feedback and questions on the slides that we present to you today. As Ingrid mentioned, we have the public consultation underway at the moment on these tools. So this is your great opportunity to provide your feedback in that way. I also want to mention that the tools that we're going to be discussing today would be used during the planning of patient engagement activities. So they are used at the very start of your activities with patients to plan that. So next slide, please, Matthew. So there are two tools that we're going to be speaking about this afternoon in the first few slides, and then we'll move on to the third that Ingrid mentioned earlier. So we're going to be talking about the recommendations on how to find the right match for the right patient engagement activity. And we're going to be also talking about the second tool, how to raise awareness on managing competing interests in a multi-stakeholder environment. Next slide, please. So here are the actors today. We're going to be taking different roles during the next couple of slides. So myself, I'm going to be playing the role of Sheila, who's an industry representative. Matthew will be taking the role of a patient group representative, and Elisa and Maria will be providing their views on their case study. So in terms of the stakeholders involved for the right match recommendations document, Sheila, she works as a head of a patient engagement group within Genus Pharma. She's planning a patient engagement activity to help identify RA patients and endpoints for the design of a clinical trial. And Rick is a volunteer at our arthritis patients group, an international patient organisation. He coordinates patient engagement in the organisation and provides support to patients through the process. He's the patient representative. And the activity, as mentioned, is to identify the patient-relevant endpoints for the design of a clinical study, a clinical trial in rheumatoid arthritis. Next slide, please. So the tools that we're going to be talking about today are really an overview of the process. This, the slide screenshots that you see today are taken from the very big document to develop these tools and are open for consultation at the moment. So in terms of step one of finding the right match for the right patient engagement activity, it's all about outlining the patient engagement activity on shared purpose. Now, for some of you may not know what shared purpose means. It's actually has been developed as the first step in the patient engagement quality criteria from PFMD, who you heard from earlier. And shared purpose really is around the aims and outcomes to be agreed before patient engagement starts. And it is really set out while you plan the project. So this is very aligned to this particular tool. Next slide, please. So to embellish on what we mean by aims and outcomes, it's really about outlining the rationale for why you're doing the patient engagement activity, the objective for the collaboration, and what you see as the desired outcomes from a pharma industry perspective to start with in this particular case study. You're going to describe what the activity is and what you're trying to achieve, what's expected from engaging patients, their representatives and within their roles, to outline the interdependencies with other engagement activities that may be planned or may be ongoing, to provide a best estimate on the timelines. This is really crucial when you're engaging patients. Patients like to know how much time is going to be required, over what sort of period, etc., and what their expectations are. You need to indicate what budget is required for the activity, because obviously you'll need, in most cases, to pay patients in some way, or certainly provide support for their expenses. So you should have a budget assigned for that. And then, if there's a support of a facilitator, particularly if you're engaging patients who are not native English speakers, for example. So after the engaging partner in step one has drafted this first version, so it is a very first version of the engagement activity for their internal purposes to really agree within the pharma company, what the activity looks like and the scope, then the co-creation really can begin with the support of the patient community. And in most cases, we found that the patient organisations are the first partners that you would go to for most patient engagement activities. However, we recognise that there sometimes aren't patient organisations existing in all disease areas and for all topics. So, we recognise that, and we'll go on to describe that in more detail later on. And really, it's about making that first point of contact to co-create the patient engagement project, to avoid those purely transactional elements where it's a one and done, so to speak, and then there's no sort of longer term interaction going on within the community. And it's about consolidating those efforts as well to really build trust and rapport and that collaboration throughout your activity, but also beyond. Next slide, please. So in step 2A, it's about identifying the relevant patient organisation to work with you to co-create the activity. And we'll go on to describe how you might achieve that in a moment. And as I mentioned, if there is no patient organisation that exists, there are alternative methods that you can adopt to make sure that you're still co-creating with a patient community. So the engaging partner in step 2 would make sure that they are identifying that relevant patient organisation, and in step 2B, working with the alternatives to achieve patient engagement. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think that's over to you, Matthew, to describe in more detail.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Matthew Bood. I'm the coordinator of Paradigm that was introduced today and a bit at the plenary. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session on the 2 or 3 tools that we prepared within Paradigm. So in this document that Paradigm prepared, it was finding the right match for the right activity, and it was felt that it was very important to have focused on the power, the role, the capacities of what patient groups can do, patient advocacy groups can do. Yet, we also know that in many cases, the patient groups is not the best match, simply because it doesn't exist, it doesn't have the capacity, it doesn't want to interact with pharma, or simply is not the strategy for this patient organization. And that's why we put it in this document that is important, that we need to find other alternatives to be able to reach out to the right and to identify the right partner. So first partner is patient groups. Yet when that doesn't exist, it was very important for us, and we got this comment so many times, that it's not the gold standards, and you have other way to engage with patient expert, advocate, individuals where it's important for you to be involved. But before we do that, before finding other alternatives, what is the best suitable patient organization when someone wants to engage? And that put us in a different position, because how can we characterize patient groups in a way that it's respectful but meaningful for the type of activity that you want to engage with? And I think, Kay, you mentioned very well in the step 1, all the different steps that before engaging, before reaching out to your partners, you need to think about. So that's why we developed this diagram too, that I'd show that in the screen. And we have the red boxes, the green boxes, and the blue boxes. For the one that are colorblind, the red is on the left, the blue is on the right, and in middle you have the green boxes. And it's really focusing on 3 main areas. On the top left, on the red, you have the ability to work in medicine R&D with industry, but also with other stakeholders. Okay, and we decline that in 3 other subtopics. Okay, so I'm not going to read that slide, but that's the idea. And by the way, the slide with the recording of this meeting will be shared afterwards. Secondly, we focus on the ability to engage with the patient community and to support it. Because patient groups, it's fine, but it needs to be able to interact with the diversity of the community. They know how to do it. And when it comes to diversity, it's also very important that we're not only talking to one group of patients, but this patient group has the ability, and that's the blue box, to represent the patient population diversity, but also geography. So for some of the project, you want to have a local, a regional, a national engagement, and then you will reach to the national patient organization. But once you want to go broader, and the case study today, it's clinical endpoint, endpoint for clinical trial, development of endpoints, then you may want to be broader than the national organization. It's not because you speak the same language, it's not because you know the folks, that should only be this patient organization that the engaging partner should talk to. So basically, that's what we have in this slide. Now, what we also have developed, it's something which might seem trivial to many, but is to develop a checklist, a simple checklist on the elements that you need to consider before engaging with a patient organization. And that's already also in the tools. So exactly what I was mentioning. Does the organization have the experience, the expertise, and the methodology to engage the members? Okay. And there is no right or wrong answer to any of those questions. It's a yes, no, partially, okay? There is no best. It's what they can do to be the best partner. And I think that's also important for patient groups to be able to monitor themselves in terms of the capacity they have to interact with the members, to be an attractive, engaging partner if they wish to be. So I'm talking here about the capacities. Do the patient organization have a panel, a pool, similar resources, really to engage widely the members? Because we don't want to talk to only the gray hair people leading the organizations. Okay, we want to talk to everybody, and that's why it's so important. Do they have channels to discuss with the members, and so on? So I'm not going to read through all that slide, but every point here is actually quite important. And again, there is no right or wrong answer. It's yes, no, partially, and why. And at the end, it's an assessment of maybe not the best partner, but the most suitable for the engaging activity. And in the case we have, the arthritis patient group as a pool of experts with experience to be involved in medicine R&D. They also have a dedicated person to organize patient engagement activities, opportunities, and it's also very important to be sure that there is a point of contact. There is somebody dedicated. These arthritis patient groups also have a training program to make sure that the members are trained and know what the development of medicine is. And they have very well established channels to reach the wide arthritis patient community. So it's actually this patient group, the group that Rick represents, potentially a quite good group to reach out in this case study, for this case. Okay, Ian, back to you. You muted, sorry. I ask you to unmute.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. I'm back, I think. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for that. He's in control, you can see there. Okay, so I described steps 2A and 2B, and now we're moving on to step 3 in this overview presentation. So it's about, Sheena and Rick coming together to jointly co-define the competencies needed to carry out the activity. And that's the competencies of the patients that we want to engage in this particular activity. So next slide, please. So to describe that in a bit more detail, we've actually provided you with a competency table which will help you as an industry partner in this particular case study or as a patient group representative to really work through together, this is a partnership here, to develop what you agree on as the competencies for the activity. And I think Matthew's going to take us through that table in a bit more detail.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Kay. So when it comes to which group, so we were talking about which group, now we're diving into which individuals, okay? And we developed with UPATI, and actually it was a UPATI document that we adapted in the work of Paradigm. So that's why it's very important that the logo of UPATI is there, because they did a fantastic work in developing the first draft of this competency table. So how to read the competency table. Now it's going to you that you will have to work a bit. So let's take one example, okay? So you all remember the question that we're working on today, okay? It's about developing endpoints for a new clinical trial, right? We're talking about the competency on the medical expertise, indication-specific expertise, okay? We define that as the knowledge about the indication, the disease, the treatments, the care, and the life circumstances of those living with the disease, okay? So that's what we're going to ask you. Now, this competence for specific people can be low, okay? Basic indication, treatment, and care expertise. It can be intermediate, extended indication, treatment, and care, or high competence, in-depth, okay, knowledge of the same topic, right? Again, here, there is nothing, yes, right or wrong in this table here. We would like you to think about at the stage of co-designing the project, okay? So you are a patient organization and, in this case, academia or industry, and you want to develop those new endpoints, okay? And you are specifically, what type of people should I ask to or engage with, okay, when it comes to the indication, okay, the expertise specific indications. And we are at the co-designing of the project, okay? So for that, we're going to use a tool that many of you know. It's Menti, okay? So we would like you to go on www.menti.com on your phone, on your computer, on your iPad, on your tablet, whatever, they all work. And you enter the code 466227. Okay? Remember, we're talking about indication-specific expertise, and the expertise should be low, and then you grade that 1, intermediate, and then it's a 2, or high, that's a 3, okay? To our German friends, this is how it works today. So can you just go on menti.com and you use the code 46, 62, and 27. So we're going to allow you a bit of time here to answer. I have already 2 people who answered, 3 now, and you will see that it might not be that easy actually to answer this question. So we have several cases for you here. So we are 172 people in this session. As soon as we reach about 70, we can move on. Does it work for everybody? Oh yeah. Thank you guys for putting the code in the chat. And if for 55 people, 59, about 60 people, the level is actually quite high. It's intermediate, huh? It's 2.1. So that's already interesting. And the curve here, we can see that is really between 2 and 3. Huh? It's interesting to see. Okay, so now we have more answers. And so we believe that this competency table it's actually a great tool to use these this competency table to really define the different attributes to the people you need to engage with, but also it can be used as a self-assessment tool, and that's why it's also very important. Okay, we have 78 people. We can move on. Thank you very much. We have other example for you. So now we're going to discuss about the public health expertise. Okay, same case study. Okay, the definition of endpoints for the development of the new clinical trial. Okay, and we are talking about the competence public health expertise, which is the knowledge about access and participation in the healthcare system. Okay, like the social law, and knowledge about health policy. Okay, so in this case, again, basic knowledge, intermediate knowledge, or high knowledge. Okay, and here we're going to discuss for the people who participate in the project. Okay, so the people that you interview, people that are in your pool, focus groups, and so on. Okay, so you have your project done. Okay, you co-design with different partners. And now it's the people that you invite at the table to really provide the feedback. And we're talking about, do they need to know much about public health? Okay, that's what we want. And same thing on the mentee. I think the slide should have moved on your screen. You can answer now. Public health expertise, is it low, intermediate, or high? Okay. Already 22 people answers. It's actually quite well distributed. Now we're going more to the low, the distribution. So you see, this is a completely different exercise. We're not talking about indication, we're talking about public health policy expertise. So interesting. And we can already here see the answers, okay? So 29 people is for, are voting for low, okay? So we got 50 people, we can move on. Our last exercise on this, it's about the personal experience, okay? It's about the indications specific expertise based on personal experience. In other words, it's about arthritis patients, okay? Themselves as a personal, so people living with arthritis, okay? The low, it's empathic in relation to those affected. Medium is affected indirectly, such as a family member, okay? Or you are directly affected by the condition. And we would like you to assess the competence when it comes to participation in the process, okay? So the people you engage at the table to discuss about arthritis, okay? Should they be empathic in relation to those affected indirectly, or directly affected as a patient themselves, okay? And again here, it's a mentee. And here we already have people who voted. And that's interesting because here you see the curve, it's completely moved to the right, okay? So most of the people believe that when you want to develop endpoints for clinical trial, it's probably a better idea if you affected yourself or if your family member is affected with arthritis, okay, in this case. So again here, it's another example on how this competency table that was developed by UPAT and adapted by Paradigm Work can be used in that case. And we already have 80 people who reply. So thank you very much for this. And I think that concludes the step 3 of our document that we wanted to present today. And now we going to discuss about the step 4. The step 4 is identify within this patient organization the representative that match the needed competencies, okay, to identify patient-relevant rheumatoid arthritis endpoints. So basically is we used the competency table, right? Now we have identified those people, and now it's a step 4. And what that means is they need to be experienced of living with a disease, and they have knowledge of the R&D process and similar activities. But that's also fine. So you identify the right people, but we know that developing medicine is a highly regulated industry. I mean, that should shock no one. And so it's important for Rick, for the guy who is in charge of reaching out to the different people here, it's also important that they start checking for competing interest before deciding who could join the activity, because there is a whole range of activity that can be done or cannot be done, or we impair all the down the line activities to be carried out. So that's why it's very important to check for competing interest. And that's why we have on the step 4A and 4B in the document laid out why it's important to qualify and understand the membership, okay, for people to join, but also, and that can be done by patient engagement managers, for instance, and all those guys can have what is needed to really work with the membership and to address conflict and competing interests, and that will be presented a bit later. Okay, Elisa, I think now it's your turn because you worked on that a lot.
Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisa Farré, and this afternoon, my colleague Maria Caballé and myself, who are both patient engagement managers at Eurordis, will be presenting the next part. We have just seen so that part of the process of identifying the right match is checking for potential conflicts of interest. So now, like I said, we're moving on to that part, and during the next slides, we will present you some tools that have been developed based on our guidance document, raising awareness on managing competing interests in a multi-stakeholder environment. During the multiple workshops and discussions within Paradigm, it also became clear the need to cover this topic in a guidance document, but also to develop from there a series of practical tools that could help all stakeholders and navigate this complex environment. And that's what the guidance is called, raising awareness. So make all the relevant players involved aware of how to manage, the importance of managing competing interests, and how to assess them as well. So coming back to the case, as mentioned earlier, the engaging partners should check for potential conflicts of interest before starting the activity. But before going into details, let's see what you would do if you were Sheila. As you know, Sheila works in patient engagement at a pharma company and is planning an activity involving patients to discuss patient-relevant endpoints for the design of a clinical trial. And before starting, she asks herself, will the participation in this activity influence the patient's ability to engage with other stakeholders? So what do you think would be the most likely answer? And now you will be also required to log into Menti again, so please stay there. And give us what you would think would be the most likely response. So I repeat the question. Will this influence the patient's ability to engage with other stakeholders? A, no, not at all. B, yes, it will prevent the engagement with any other stakeholder. Or C, maybe. This depends on the policy for managing competing interests of the other stakeholder and the type of activity in which the patient will be involved. So here we see the results coming up. And okay, yeah, we have 56, 59. Okay. Okay. So we reach 70, we stop. Okay, so I think it's clear that a majority of you thinks that that depends. Depends on the policy that the engaging stakeholder establishes, and also the type of activity in which the patient will be involved. Each stakeholder groups define the types and rules for engagement with their stakeholders, and the engaging stakeholder and the process of engagement define what represents a conflict of interest. This is just an example, but I wanted to show you that this example is included in a tool consisting of a series of educational scenarios that explore hypothetical situations and possible actions for the management of competing interests and conflict of interest during patient engagement activities. For each scenario, we propose what is probably the most appropriate response, but we also give the rationale for each option. And here again, also there are no fully right or wrong answers, but we try to provide the contents, the context, and give the rationale for each of the options. This tool, like I said, is also aims to raise awareness among engaging stakeholders, among the engaging partners, of the potential consequences that patient engagement might have on patients. But also, this tool aims to help patients to make informed decisions when engaging with one or more than one type of stakeholder. And we will see that this is very frequent. Next, please. So why is it important to check potential competing interests? So as we have seen, and Kay and Mathieu led us through it, the interactions between the patient community and the engaging partners should be based on mutual transparency, respect, autonomy, independence. But patients, you know that they are at the center of these interactions and are becoming increasingly involved in patient engagement activities as experts. And doing so, they may interact with different stakeholders at the same time or over a period of time. So depending on the activity and the previous interactions that the patient had before, the engaging stakeholder might restrict their involvement. Therefore, it's important to identify potential competing interests early in the process in order to manage them effectively and to be able to put in place measures to avoid or limit the extent of the conflict and reduce the subsequent impact that this may have on future interactions. Next, please. So this is this example on the screen shows how different interests can come into competition. But it's the engaging stakeholder, as we said, who ultimately defines what constitutes a conflict for a particular process or activity. This example here shows a common situation commonly faced by patients engaging in medicines development. Okay, a patient can be involved in different activities with more than one stakeholder simultaneously or over time. So here, and we wanted to show that a patient has been invited to engage in different activities with company A, with a competitor company B, and also with the European Medicines Agency. And each time the process is a bit similar. The engaging stakeholder will ask the patient to declare their interest. This is the previous interactions that the patient has had with other stakeholders. And then the engaging stakeholder will assess the declared interest according to their internal rules and determine if there is a conflict of interest or not. If that's the case, if there's a conflict, if a conflict is identified, the patient's involvement in the activity might be then partially or fully restricted. That will, like I said, depend on the policy and the rules, the internal rules that the engaging stakeholder defines. Next, please. So these concepts are described in another tool. And here we're just bringing a snapshot of all these tools that have been developed. And this one is a short guidance that again aims to raise awareness among all stakeholders about the importance of managing competing interests, and also to give guidance on the process. The first part of this short guidance covers general principles applicable to all stakeholders, and so why it's important to manage competing interests, definitions, and all these, let's say, general information that we felt it was worth giving guidance to everyone. And the second part, which you can see here on the left part of the screen, focuses on specific points relevant for medicines developers, for regulators, HTA bodies and payers, and for patients and patient organizations. Also in the guidance, we include examples of levels of restriction applied by the EMA and by UNETA, to just give a couple of examples, to participate in the respective activities according to the declared interest. And now I hand over to Maria.
Before we move on, I just have something. So first I need to ask Maria to unmute. Maria, I just asked you to unmute. Great.
Yes.
So we have people answering questions in the chat, and we ask you at the beginning that we will use the chat because there are 166 now people joined, so we cannot have people speaking. It is going to be too much noise. The chat is also recorded, so in case we don't answer your questions at the end of the session because of the time limit, we will answer all the questions when you will receive the recording of the session, the slide deck, and we will be sure that we also answer your questions. So no worries.
Thank you, Mattia, and thank you, Elisa. So, as we were mentioning, usually the engaging stakeholder will require the patients to fill in a declaration of interest before the activity starts. So this form may vary depending on the stakeholder, but for example, you will be asked to provide this type of information for a certain period of time. So your affiliations and employment, your current and or past financial interests, and if you've been involved in an advisory board for a pharmaceutical company or another organization, such as non-profit organizations. So sometimes it can be difficult to recall all this information and therefore to complete the declaration of form accurately. So for this reason, and next, please. Next. Thanks. So for this reason, we have created the following tool, the log of activities, and with the aim to facilitate and ensure the proper completion of a declaration of interest form. So patients, before filling in this form, they will go back to their log of activities and see which activities have to be declared depending on what is required by the engaging stakeholder. So in the tool, we have a list with the common activities in which patients can be involved in the medicine's development, and this will help them to fill in this log of activities and therefore to fill in the declaration of interest form. So here in the right side of the slide, you can see this template that we have created, so including part of the information that should be tracked. So this is an example, and each patient or patient organization can adapt it according to their needs, but for that in the tool, we give you a guidance on how to set out a log of activities. So for example, for patients organizations, this will be very useful in order to identify patients that matching with certain criteria, and will also help to easily identify who is free from conflict and to participate in the activity without any restriction. So having this tool and this log of activities updated with the date, and here we have some examples what we list, the date, the length, also the activity, each engagement activity. This will save patients time and make the process less tedious and more transparent. And next, please. So before we conclude, and now that you are all familiar with Menti, we would like to ask you if you are keeping a record of your interactions with the different stakeholders, what type of interactions should you list in your log of activities? So we have option A, only the ones for which you have received compensation and or remuneration. Option B, you will list all of these interactions. And option C, you don't keep any record of your activities because it's not useful. So what do you think would be the most likely answer? Well, I see we only have 36. We have to read 70, like Elisa. Okay. Yes. So the most broader answer for now, and for what type of interaction should you list in your log, is all of them. It's option B. And yeah, we think we can stop. It's pretty clear. So it's B, it's all of them, because we encourage patients to be as much accurate and transparent as possible in their log of activities. However, they should be mindful not to disclose any confidential information when sharing this log of activities with their patient organization, and also when disclosing their interest to the engaging stakeholder. And before we conclude, just a quick reminder that all these tools that we've been presenting now are in public consultation until the 9th of July, so please don't hesitate to provide your feedback. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. And good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Stuart Faulkner. So we're now moving on to another tool, keeping with the theme that Kay mentioned at the start of the session, which can really help you with the planning of a patient engagement activity. And this is a tool that we've developed around the reporting and dissemination of patient engagement activities. Next slide, please. So this is the team we've had working on this. You'll hear in a few minutes from my colleague Anna, but we've had fantastic input and support from Kay, Apostolus, Leiber, and Lynn. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by reporting and dissemination? It really is here. It's the structured and timely reporting, not only of the objectives and the results of the patient engagement activity, but what were the outcomes and what were the learnings of that patient engagement activity, and that there is sufficient detail in the reporting and dissemination that permit a knowledge gain both between the engaging stakeholders and with the broader public into the public domain. And so what you can see in the picture on the bottom half of the screen is there are three key elements within the tool that we've developed. One of the key elements is overarching guiding principles that really cover the broad part of the tool. But in the planning phase, you can accompany that guiding principles with a checklist that really helps you in the planning phase. What considerations do I need in the planning phase of my patient engagement activity? And what do I need to consider when I'm considering about and capturing the amount of information that I may disseminate and consider for my dissemination strategy? And then during the sort of implementation, you can then match the guidance with a template that we've created, and this is a template to help you capture some of that detail in a much more structured and logical way, so you capture the objectives and the results and those learnings. And then in the final part, really moving from dissemination into communication, you can then use that template to really bridge between that sort of internal reporting through to the external and then into the public domain. Whether it be on an organization website, whether you're putting this into on a third-party platform, or indeed possibly publishing your outputs in a journal publication. So next slide. So why is this all important? Well, I think this really hits back to the point that Ingrid made at the very beginning of the presentation here. When we think about patient engagement, it's an ecosystem, and it's an ecosystem that's constantly evolving and learning. And really, in order for it to learn and evolve, we need to have that continuous and collective knowledge gain about how patient engagement is done, what is done, how it was done, what were the outputs of it, and more importantly, what was learned, what went well, what didn't go well. So not only can individual stakeholders or those engaging stakeholders learn from that, but also that knowledge is available to other stakeholders to use so they can learn from that and improve their patient engagement practices and processes in the future. And another point that Ingrid hit upon at the start was, reporting on this is not a legal requirement, but it really is important that we have this information, this knowledge, really in a place where others can learn from it. Combined with that, it really helps improve the transparency of the outcomes of the patient engagement activities. It's important to learn from what went well, but also what didn't go well, and what can be learned from that, and how can we improve what we do in the future. It enhances the opportunity for collaboration, so that's the involvement and collaboration and co-production of the patient or patient organizations with the development of the reporting and the dissemination material. So the material is then fit for purpose for the audience that will be using it. And also it allows, I think, a much better continuity, a much more seamless continuum from how patient engagement is documented and reported, really moving from that sort of internal reporting within an organization, within a functional team, through to the external environment with the engaging stakeholders, and then through again into the public domain, whether that be an organization website or a journal publication. And it's something that allows that to be much more seamless, not something that is done sort of after the fact that requires extra time and effort. So this really is helping to avoid sort of redundancy and duplication there. Next slide. So how could this tool help you? There are three key elements to it. One are the guiding principles, which you see on the screen here. So I'm just going to briefly go some of these. So again, this is thinking about the strategy and the process and things that need to be done when you're thinking about a reporting and sort of dissemination strategy. So it's planning and agreeing the overall goals and time frame of your strategy. What sort of mechanisms, what sort of channels do you need to consider and that can be used in the dissemination of the outputs, the outcomes, the learnings of that patient engagement activity? And when you're thinking about what mechanisms and channels you might use, what processes do we need to have in place and agreed between all those respective partners ahead of time? What are the capacities and capabilities for the writing of that material, the review, the sign-off of that material, and how are those roles and responsibilities agreed between all the engaging stakeholders up front? We've heard many concerns about confidentiality and what material can be shared in the public domain. So early involvement of legal and compliance. So there's a clear understanding of what information can go into the public domain, and also that it can get there in a timely manner. And we talk, so it's really the principle of prospectively planning this, so there aren't any obvious roadblocks or delays as to actually reporting and disseminating the outcomes of the patient engagement activity. And then how can we meaningfully involve patients in the co-production and development of that material? So again, that the material is fit for purpose, but also that those the patients can be involved in a flexible manner to really to fit their needs, their times, and the expertise that they have available. Next slide, please. And then we have a couple of considerations around sort of the format of the report and the outputs, language, context, thinking about translating into other languages. So really these align with some of the broader guiding principles that were raised in this morning around the sort of reporting of clinical trial legislation, around sort of creating lay language summaries, but also principles that you would consider if you are publishing in a journal article. So these are common themes that you should consider, and also the opportunity, if you are considering translating into a language of the country where the patient engagement activity took place, that immediately increases the spread and dissemination, also increases the opportunity for learning much broader in that sense. And then finally, that the material that is created is stored and managed, but also discoverable to all relevant stakeholders. So the knowledge gain as a collective cannot occur if it's not discoverable, if it's hid, if it's not easy to find. So again, making that easy to discoverable, and also that whatever approach, whatever strategy you use for your dissemination strategy, did you align it and be flexible with the existing documents, existing templates that you use within your organization. So this is really about, you know, maximizing opportunities, but minimizing redundance, extra effort, and extra time. Next slide, please. So the second element to our tool is a planning checklist, similar to what was mentioned in the previous set of tools. This is really to help you in the planning part of your dissemination activity that will go alongside general planning of your patient engagement activity as well. So this is a simple checklist of yes, no answers that cover things like process. And the example highlighted here is a question around the meaningful involvement of patients. Is it confirmed that patients will be involved jointly in decisions about the reporting and dissemination of the activity? Yes or no, there is no right answer, but if the answer is no, there's a choice, there's a chance to add some comments. And so you can follow this list through the, and use it in combination with your own reporting structures, but actually it's quite handy to use after the fact and actually reflect on your practices and actually see where there are opportunities for improvements in the future there. Next slide, please. And so the final element of our tool is a reporting template. So this really encompasses some more structure and some more detail of the elements of that activity. Again, the objectives, what was done, with who and when, what were the outcomes, and more importantly, what were the learnings, to really provide some structure for you to capture that detail, to actually help you in a timely dissemination of the outputs and outcomes of those activity, and to maximize learning and discoverability, not only for the stakeholders engaged at the time, but also for others to learn from this. So what you see here is a screenshot of just the very front part of that template. And so all these three elements can be used in combination when you're planning and implementing your strategy. So next slide. So just to finish off, we've actually filled out a template completed with a real life example, just to give you a flavor of the sort of detail that we are really recommending to put into these reports, so that yourselves and others can learn from this. So this is a real example from a project called Radar AD. It was a patient advisory board that involved patients with mild cognitive impairment and in the design of an element of clinical trials. So this is the snapshot of just the front part of the template here. So immediately you can see there's some information from the who organized it and a contact point. So again, if I'm new to patient engagement, or I'm new to working with populations with mild cognitive impairment, and I'd like to know more, there's immediately very useful to have a point of contact there where you can find out more information. The example highlighted in the red box here, we've heard is quite an useful bit of information to have around the time frame of the involvement. So this is not just about the time frame of involvement of the patient engagement activity itself, because it may be a single activity or something that may span over a long period of time and several activities, but also to really understand the context of how long the engagement has been between the two stakeholders, which might be something quite long-standing. Next slide. So the next part of this completed template really gets into some of the detail of who did you involve and how did you involve them. So for the two examples highlighted here in the red boxes, this documents that this was a patient advisory board composed of people with dementia, and actually there's a very handy link already in there that if you want to find more about the actual details of that advisory board, who they are and what they do, there is a link there to go and find out some more information. And then you have things about, well, how did you select the patients? So this then goes back to the tool that was first presented by Matthew and his colleagues around how did you find the right patients? How did you select those patients? What criteria did you follow? And how did you match the patient to the particular engagement activity? Again, if you are new to the patient engagement activity or new to working with this particular patient group or type of patients, this is really, really, really useful information to know up hand, so you can streamline your activities. And then at the bottom here, the final box in red really describes about any training that was provided to those patients prior to the patient engagement activity. So again, this is very, very useful to know. In this instance, it's an honest reflection that these were existing members that have already been used many times in many patient activities. So they didn't require any specific training for this activity, but there was information provided to them upfront in advance. Next slide, please. And so the final two parts of the template here, it's really reflecting upon what elements of the planning and execution went well and what didn't go so quite well. So there's some very nice detail here. The two boxes in red was that the organisers found that actually using breaks throughout the day and have a particularly long lunch break were very important to really help work with the patient population involved and ensure that it had sufficient breaks and they could engage with the full content for the full day. I think quite nicely highlighted here is they found very useful that actually making sure the patients arrived the night before and stayed in a hotel accommodation was extremely useful, so that they were refreshed on the day and didn't have a long commute on the day of the engagement activity. So that immediately has implications relating to how you plan your patient engagement activity around hotel accommodation, travel, and finances there. Next slide. And then reflecting on what didn't go quite so well. So the two boxes highlighted here, it was a very large group, and although they had breaks, it was quite difficult to manage the number of breaks, managing against people's needs when they needed to have those breaks, but also to ensure that they had enough time and enough scope to allow everyone to have a successful interaction and really capture everyone's insights. So this was something that was quite honest and transparent, that this is something that could be looked at in the future as to how they structure the session, how they plan the session to improve upon future patient engagement strategies. Next slide. So that's really just a very brief overview of the tool, the three elements in it, and how that can help you really interact and plan your dissemination strategy. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anna, who's going to get a bit more interaction with you to hear about a little bit more about some of the practical considerations that you face when you're involving patients in reporting and dissemination. Over to you, Anna.
Hi, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here with so many of you, still almost 5, and I see there is a big number of people still here listening to us. I think as Ingrid was presenting our work, she mentioned something very, very important, and is that this work that we are doing in reporting is a relatively new area of work, and there is not much done already on what has to be reported and where and why and with whom. So when we were trying to do this presentation, we were thinking it would be very, very important to actually discuss with you some of the key issues that we are highlighting in the presentation that Stuart, in the work that we have made and that Stuart was presenting. And in particular, we had a number of ideas that we had discussed a lot within our team and externally with the Paradigm colleagues. And one of them was around what Stuart was mentioning and the relevance of involving patients in reporting and dissemination. But then once we agree that might be something important, is more the how and what might be the more important considerations that people might face when involving the patients in this reporting and dissemination. As fortunately, we are many of us today here. We are a large group of almost 200 people. We cannot open for just a discussion. So we are going to go back to the Menti. I see many of you are already active in Menti. I think after a Menti afternoon, you all know how it works. So the first question for you is, which is the most important practical consideration that you face in involving patients in reporting and dissemination? And you have there a number of different options. These are the options that we within the team have been discussing and the ones we believe are more important. Unfortunately, you are going to be able only to choose one of these options. So I would like, once you have actually choose one of your options in the screen, please use the chat box and tell us a bit more. We are going to record the chat box, so everything you leave in the chat for us will be very much welcome and will be very useful. So please feel free to elaborate on your answer in the chat box. Also, there might be other options which are not there on the screen, so feel free to write about them or to explain to us why do you think that's important. I can see already 42 of you are answering to what we have suggested at potential practical considerations, and I see many of you are in 3 specific areas. One of them, the time and the resources that might be involved. Please let us know in the chat which kind of resources. That resources from the company, from the patient organization, from both. So please feel free to elaborate more about what kind of resources are important in the chat box. I see also a lot of you refer to the meaningful co-production of material. So again, please feel free to go to the chat box and tell us more about what is needed for this meaningful co-production, how this needs to be done. And also there's a big important aspect, and is the legal and compliance. So the need to involve very early on from industry, the legal department, the compliance department in this reporting and this involvement. So please also, if you have anything more to add from that perspective, feel free to add anything in the chat. Stuart, I think, is also looking at the chat. So if he sees anything in particular, any particular theme, he will also be able to help us to see more in details of the different considerations and the why you think this is important. I see a lot of you have already referred to the other existing standards in the UK and in other countries, so that's something also very important. So thank you for also signposting this to us. So it keeps coming now. It's more also in the overall goals and timelines, more people leaning towards this. But I think the most the most important practical consideration, I think, for most people seems to be the meaningful co-production of the material, and that might be one of the biggest challenges. Also, please remember this whole report is right now in public consultation, so you can also go to the public consultation and let us know more about your ideas, because this in particular is one of the pillars of our report, the importance of involving, and we'll be very, very glad to hear more about this, either in consultation here in the chat, or feel free to email either Stuart or myself, and we can start the dialogue in a more personal view. Very good. I don't think I see 60 people already reply. I don't see any more responses coming. Okay, can we move to the next question, please? Stuart, Matthew. Our second theme that we felt was very, very important, and I was reading the chat before, and I see already some people asking about it, and is the second part of the reporting. So it's very nice to do reporting, but we need to disseminate it. So that's another of the key, I think, topic that when we were writing the report was coming back to us. So we are going to write this very accessible, very nice, transparent report of the activities that we are doing, but where do we need to disseminate them? Where is the best place that we could put these documents so it's available for more people? Our question is a bit more simple to you, is where do you typically disseminate? Again, you can only have one answer. I understand some of you might have a few of them, so you might use not just one but several of them, but just please try to think which is the main one, which is the one typical where you typically go. Do you disseminate just within your internal team? So you're in a company within the departments, or you are in a university, or the departments, or the internal teams. Do you disseminate mainly within your own website? So if in my case, that would be Alzheimer's Europe website. If you are working from a pharma company, that would be your own website. Is that with the website of all the different stakeholders involved? So not just your own website, but also of the patient organization involved or any other stakeholders involved. Do you know of other third-party platforms? And we are mentioning there a few examples like UPATI, PFMD, which already have very nice spaces for reporting and bringing together cases of patient engagement activities. Do you tend to do dissemination through journal in peer-reviewed or the type of journal, like an articles in peer-review journals? Is it more likely to be in forums and conferences? Or another possible answer is typically you do not tend to disseminate about the patient engagement activities that your organization is involved in. So I see already, as before, we have Well, a more spread answer. We have, I think, many about their own website. It's quite a lot of the people, but also I see very close to that forum and conferences where you might attend, and the websites of other stakeholders, and good number just internal teams. There's a few people who do not disseminate typically, and one person, none of the above. So if that person wants to tell us more about either which is the other option that we might be missing there, that would be also very helpful to us. Or any other ideas where you think might be important to disseminate. Within the actual report, we have a section about providing signposting people to potential dissemination spaces. So any more ideas that you can provide to us are very welcome, and we will make good use of them. So please feel free to send us any more ideas. I think there's 44 people already who have replied the Menti. I see already a few people also in the chat, and some people talking about the difficulty to publish in peer-reviewed journals. And so others talking about social media, which is not there. Perhaps it's a very good idea. Also Twitter, Facebook, social media, and other channels. And many of you saying it's multiple channels, not just one channel where you disseminate. So that's very interesting. I think I don't see moving the number of people. Can we go to the last question, Matthew, please? And our last question, I think that's the most important question indeed. And it's about, well, we have developed all these tools, all these materials, and we wanted to know, how do you feel about implementing these materials? So, because at the end of the day, I think what's important is not to have very beautiful tools, very beautiful materials, but to have people being able to use them. So we wanted to learn a little bit about how might you get your internal buy-in within your organization to use and adopt this reporting tool. And again, we have there different options. Here you have one of all of the above, so you can choose all of the above, or you might choose which is the most important one again. There might be other, particularly in this one, we have less possibilities. So please feel free to, again, use the chat to add other things that you might need to do to have this internal buy-in, to be able to use that and disseminate, and not just to have this in your drawer, but to also make good use of that. I see, yeah, a lot of people are in all of the above. So I present is not just one, but several strategies you might need. See many of them, you need to present it to managers, to other teams. So to raise awareness of that this exists seems to be a quite important answer. But I see coming higher and higher the all of the above. So like a quite complex strategy where you might need to do all of the things to talk to your teams, to demonstrate the benefit, the value, and to use it to see how actually how useful it is, because at the end of the day, sometimes until you don't use it, you don't understand how much it might be valuable for your organization. We have already 48 questions. Don't be shy, please reply. It's very important to us, and particular any information in the chat is particularly relevant. We are going to have a good look at all the different comments, and we will make sure to address, to consider all of them. 48. Yeah. Leave a couple more seconds. Stuart, have you seen any particular topic within the chat? Anything in particular that you want to highlight of what people were discussing in the chat? Stuart? Matthew, can you unmute Stuart, please?
Thank you, Anna. I think one that's come up a few times is around which dissemination channel is most appropriate. and which one can be used. So I think I think most people have been sort of self-fulfilling in their answers, that there is no right or wrong answer as to which sort of dissemination mechanism or channel that you use. It is really, is back to your point earlier, Anna, it's really where do you want to find, have that information found, and what is your audience? We've mentioned a few here, as there's a few options to disseminate on an organization's website, or co-publish it on the engaging stakeholders website, and then the two sort of existing open platforms that have some very nice example of these sort of case study reports are ones that are already mentioned, which are the PFMD platform and the PATI platform, that have a quite nice database already of case study style reports. So there's no real right or wrong answer. It's really what is your audience and where do you go. I should say as well, there's been quite a few questions around publishing in sort of academic journals. How we created both this tool, but particularly the template, we sort of mapped a lot of the common elements across a lot of existing documentation around that. So from the case studies that already exist, from a number of internal reporting documentations, from what are called the GRIP and the GRIP2 guidelines, and those are the sort of recognized guidelines for publishing in journal publications. So a lot of those key elements are already mapped in the template. So one of the concepts we're really trying to build is that when you think about a dissemination, sort of reporting and dissemination strategy, is that we hope that this tool and some of the elements within it can help really bridge and make it a much more seamless sort of transition from the data that's gathered and how it's collected and how it might be reported internally, but how it much more easily gets past that internal barrier to the external environment into the public domain without producing yet another report or without producing yet more material. It's really trying to help synergize and reduce and streamline, and by having commonality in the information that's gathered and collated there. But again, it's thinking about what your strategy is up front, and that will hopefully mitigate a lot of the downstream considerations that have come up there. If you have the strategy and you've identified what you want to do, where you want to disseminate, and how you need to do that, and who do you need to involve in that process. But there's some really, really great comments coming in here, and we'll make sure to take account of those as we finalize our deliverable here.
Thank you, Stuart. That were our 3 questions. I think it's been really good to have as much feedback from so many of you and to share this time with you here this afternoon. So from our side, from the reporting document, we also have finished our presentation, and I think it's now back to, is that to Matthew now, to yourself, Matthew, or to Giorgio?
Giorgio will
yes.
Will conclude.
So yes.
Over to you, Giorgio. Sorry.
Well, we are coming to the last part of the session, so I'm very honored to see this happening and pleased to see this huge participation. And I have to say, I didn't expect this great turnout of people, and I saw the number now, they are slightly going down, but we start with 180 around participants. And I can imagine there is a bit of fatigue effect at the end. But we want to keep your attention still going for a few minutes, because this is just the beginning. And this is the moment that we require your input. So it's really for you to be part of the process, and we are asking, and this is important to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. This is the first session. We also noticed that there is a lot going on the chat, and it was mentioned by my colleagues before, there will be a way to go more in detail and reply to all your questions. I feel that there was also a very interactive and kind of co-creative way to do between the participants in this session. So I really appreciated that there was a participation, although we went through a kind of bumpy journey, for the fact that this was supposed to be a face-to-face meeting. So we are aware of the limitations that we are experiencing now, but still I see that there is a great engagement from both sides. And I would like to thank all the the fantastic team that have put this together. Thank you, Matthew, for kind of being the glue of the work, and for all the speakers, and particularly also to Ingrid who jumped in. I would like to acknowledge also Wolfsee and Ingrid and Karina Huberman, who couldn't join this session, but they really gave a lot of work, and they are leading the work on this part of the project. Saying that, I would like to reinforce the invitation to participate to the second part. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. So we have a second appointment on July 9th. And the topics covered will be the patient engagement through community advisory board, code of conduct, and enhancement of the UPATI guidance. These tools are already out for a public consultation. So I would really recommend you to use the link that is in this slide, and we'll share the slide at the end of the session, and bring your input. So it's really the time for you, and to disseminate also to any other partner or person you think could be bringing some relevant input and voice. It was great to have you all here. I think it was really like a collaboration between different stakeholders, both from our side, but also I see that there were questions relevant from different perspectives. So we are really looking forward to go for part 2 and to meet you at the following appointments to soon. So thank you all for your participation, and I don't know if there is any other burning question now, but otherwise I will close this session, and well, we'll share with you all the feedback soon. Thank you.
Thank you, goodbye.